If you own a business and you're thinking about selling, then this playlist is for you.
Most business owners only sell once in a lifetime. They're not experts at it. It's a very important process, and there's a ton of information out there, but it can be conflicting, it can be confusing, it can be overwhelming. And on this channel, our goal is to give business owners just clear information about the process, about valuation, due diligence, the emotional side of things, deal structures, the whole gambit. I'm Brett Senkis. I'm an M&A advisor and an M&A attorney. So I help businesses on the legal side of things, and I help them on the marketing and selling the business side of things. Most of what I do is in the legal side of things, but can handle things from prepping the company, marketing and selling the company, all the way on through closing transactions and documentation and all of that. So I've got a lot of perspectives and looks at this process from a couple different vantage points. And Jacob and I have worked on a lot of transactions together.
Yeah, and I'm Jacob Roethlisberger, and I have a background in business operations and then bringing those business elements to transactions, bringing experience in presenting financials and financial modeling and due diligence and documentation for deals. And it is always a challenge. There's never a deal where there's not challenges you face. And so from business operations perspective, it's a fun puzzle to put together, and that's the experience that I bring here.
So today we were talking about the question of, do I need a broker to sell my business? That's a question you hear out in the world. That's a question we are asked sometimes. And I don't think it's exactly the right question, because the answer to that question is no. I mean, you don't absolutely need a broker. Deals get done without brokers, or we use the term M&A broker, M&A advisor. But investment banker, business broker, these are all kind of, you're hiring a professional who's usually paid a big, nice success fee if they get your deal done to handle prepping the company, bringing it to sale, finding a buyer, things like that. So on the law side, it's not infrequent that a seller will come to me with a buyer already identified. And in that case, oftentimes they will ask, do I need a broker from here? And the answer we come to is no. Part of the reason we come to that, it might sound self-serving. There's no way to get away from that, but I've got a lot of looks at this and I understand that process. I understand what brokers do. I understand how to do that job well. I get paid to do that job at times. So it's easy for me to guide someone through that. Now, if that individual went to the best M&A attorney in the world, but one who wasn't familiar with these waters necessarily, the answer might be different, right? Because finding a buyer is part of the process, but it's not the whole process. So the answer again, no, it's not impossible to sell. But what is the right question here? What should they really be asking themselves?
Yeah, that's right. When we think of buying and selling our own homes, we don't have to hire a real estate agent. And in this case, I think you're right. The answer is no. I think the right question is, should I hire? Should I hire a broker? And immediately, my next question is, who should I hire? Which broker am I looking for? What kind of a broker? Where do I find them? What does a broker bring to the table? So who should I hire from the perspective of hiring a broker?
Yeah, that's right. Because I think we could say that in nearly every deal, maybe every deal, having the right broker, not you, right broker, but a broker who earns their fee. Right? A broker who understands these waters, who takes it seriously. And there's, again, no way for us to talk about this without sounding somewhat self-serving. That's just what it is. Comment on it. It doesn't matter. We're going to try and give you the right information. And sometimes that sounds like we are the right people. We're not always the right people, okay? But we take this job seriously. We understand how to do it. We understand how to do it at high levels. And that acumen is often not what business brokers who only work on very small transactions bring to the table, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So, but we're not the only ones in town for, the $2 to $20 million deal. That's not the case. That's kind of our sweet spot. But a broker who understands these waters, navigates it, does the job well, will almost always, if not always, pay for themselves, right? I mean, I think we can say either by keeping the deal alive, getting the deal done, getting more money. I mean,
that's right.
You think that's fair? A fair assessment?
Absolutely. I think it's fair. I think the question when you're debating whether or not to hire a broker, should you hire a broker? Who's the right broker? That's absolutely fair. There are brokers who certainly they're not necessarily going to put in the work. There are brokers who are just looking to create deal flow? How many deals can I bring across the table? Then there are those brokers who really understand at a deep level how to bring a deal to bear, how to bring a deal across the finish line, and have experience in really the nitty-gritty nuances of what it takes to bring a deal across the finish line. I think even a deal where the buyer is already there. You mentioned, I have a buyer. Do I need a broker?
Why would I need a broker? I've got someone lined up already.
Right. And so let me ask you, talk about that. I have a buyer. Why do I need a broker? And I think maybe speaking for you, but talk about why there are situations where the answer is yes. I mean, certainly there are some where it's no, but in your experience, this comes from the legal perspective, I think most, but why does someone with a buyer maybe still need a broker?
Right. Yeah. So when a seller is in that situation, with me, and they already have the buyer identified, again, I understand how to navigate the deal, and they're going to have a lot of questions that maybe other very good lawyers, even very good M&A lawyers, don't necessarily understand, don't view it as their arena, don't really feel comfortable stepping in, or like they're there to do something like that and to keep a deal going and to understand why it's not got the momentum it has. So maybe we back up and talk a little bit about what a broker does. I've got other videos. We will put out other content about the process. Let's not get way off track on that. But generally speaking, talk about some of the primary roles of a broker.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, that's a great point to jump from, because in that scenario, the seller has a deal on the table, and yet there may still be a role for the broker to play in that. So start with that, Brett. What would you say in the deals that you've done, the broker, the first kind of engagement that you have when a deal comes to you, where you've said a broker's done a great job in bringing this deal to the table? What would you say is kind of the first one or two things that you'd see?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, number one, if it's coming to me at that point in the process that they've lined up a deal and a broker brought it, they've, by definition, kind of fulfilled their role. But when I dig in and look at that, I look at, have they run a healthy process for this business? Did they, some businesses get listed online, businesses we call Main Street businesses in the $2 to $20 million range under $2 million range are Main Street businesses. And that's the terminology we use. And in that world, a Main Street business gets listed on Biz Buy Sell or something like that. Larger businesses get marketed directly or through an auction process. But has the broker identified the right way to sell this business? Did they run a good process? And again, sometimes that really means not much more than a listing, but you would always have some direct contact to try, because what you really need to do, we'll cover valuation in another video, but you need to have a market process to determine what business is worth ultimately.
That's right.
That requires that you have some level of interest. Ideally, you've got multiple buyers bidding at the same time, but even if you don't, you've got enough looks at this business, enough indications of interest or non-interest to feel comfortable with where the business is sold. So it starts with, was that process robust enough? And again, it looks different for different types of businesses, but some brokers just put it on Biz Buy Sell and sit back. Not unlike maybe a residential realtor, just without any open houses, without any other marketing effort, without anything, put in the MLS and see what happens. And that's something. That has some value, but it's not maybe the best way to make sure, number one, you maximize value, or number two, your seller feels comfortable in the end that this value was a fair value. You need a process.
That's right. Well, and a broker has listed a business. They've done a great job marketing it. You have buyers interested. And then this process is going to ensue that if the broker hasn't done a great job preparing that opportunity, then we're going to face some challenges, right?
That's right.
At the next level. So
that's right.
Deals on the street, we have interest coming in, and next thing we know, we have things like due diligence starting that perhaps we're not ready for. If the broker hasn't necessarily done a great job working with the seller to say, here's your deal, here's how we're presenting it, but here's how we're going to have to defend it.
Right.
So maybe we can talk about that process of defense of the deal, and the broker's role in that.
Yeah. Before we hit that, I want to just expand a little bit on what you were saying there. A good broker will have prepared the seller for this whole process, for how this is going to look, for key terms that need to be negotiated at the sort of letter of intent stage. We see brokers, sometimes a deal comes to us with a broker, but they don't even have I mean, we will often write the letter of intent, but they don't even have the sort of key points. They haven't even gotten to that. So it's like, what do we have? We just have a price. There's more that goes into that. Or sometimes they'll have a standard form and it's just, here you go. A good broker doesn't need to be an M&A lawyer. You aren't, okay? A very good M&A advisor. But you have to have some understanding of those waters, what's ahead. You've got to be a curious individual to be able to help your seller understand what needs to be talked about at this point and to start to uncover the obstacles that are going to come up at the next stage, because you got to get into the closing, right? You don't have to get into the letter of intent. That doesn't do you any good. You don't get paid on a letter of intent.
That's right. Well, and you say obstacle, and I'm thinking in some ways that very first obstacle may be the toughest. There are obstacles throughout the deal, but the first obstacle is a buyer looks at a deal and sees, maybe, as you described, a form LOI that isn't thought out, or a first offer that isn't market, and it just is kind of off the wall. That first hurdle doesn't even get passed, right? If it's not set up at the beginning in a way that will present well to a buyer. And I think the broker can serve the seller in that way because, as we mentioned earlier, many sellers, they're doing this for the first time.
Yeah.
So they don't know what their offer should look like and what a valid offer or a valid deal, selling price or selling deal should look like, so that it gets past the first level of scrutiny of a buyer.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to be sure that the buyers have enough information. Now, they won't have all the information. Due diligence there's 2 stages to due diligence, right?
Right.
And so the first is pre-letter of intent generally, and that's a basic amount of information, still under non-disclosure agreement, but not way under the hood, right? That first. And we've got to make sure that there's enough information out there that the buyer knows what they're buying. And that's a little bit of an art, because you don't necessarily need to drop on them every wart the business has. You don't want to give away all sorts of confidential and critical information about the business without moving that buyer along in a process. But you want to make sure that this deal is going to hold. And so knowing kind of what needs to be disclosed, and again, those key points. And then, so that's the look at when it comes to us. It's kind of like, has it been prepped right? Was there a good, robust process? Is the seller aware of what's going to happen? Have we made sure the buyer has the right kind of information? And then the process all through from there. Often that's when the lawyers get involved, and lawyers are leading a lot of the conversations. But those brokers need to stay involved because the process continues all the way. There are many fail points along the way where a good broker is going to stay involved.
That's right. Yeah.
Keep their finger on the pulse of the deal and make sure that it holds and spot issues and tackles them when they need to come up. We need to figure out a resolution to something. That's and so that even if a seller comes to me with a buyer already identified, that's a decision we're going to need to make with the broker's involvement here. Be very, very helpful. And again, usually the answer is no, because I could play that role. And that role doesn't cost my client anything, really. I mean, maybe a little bit of conversation at the margin I'm billing for, but for the most part, it's part of what I'm doing as an M&A attorney. And that's unique. And, again, but it's right. What it is.
And how often does a seller have the opportunity to maybe have a broker at their disposal that they trust, or an M&A lawyer like you at their, so even there are many situations even where, unlike you're describing now, you have a seller that says, do I hire a broker, and where do I even find counsel?
Right.
Where I want to sell my business and I've got all of this stuff in front of me. Maybe I don't understand.
Yep.
Creating a deal and documenting the deal.
Yep.
And so you're describing a 2-part win there.
I am.
Which is pretty profound for a seller to have you on their team and even a broker, if they choose to have one, to help prepare something and bring their interests to bear. But I have a question for you, if I can.
Yeah.
Talk about someone who maybe should have had a broker. They brought you a deal. You're trying to paper up a deal, and it's like, oh, I wish you had not just brought this. We're fixing stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, and had you had a broker, we'd be further along. And maybe in the same vein, or they had a broker and the broker wasn't great, and they brought you a deal we're fixing. So Talk about that, fixing deals that the broker either wasn't there for or they were and it was bad.
Yeah, and so there's all sorts of various, there's many different ways this can play out. Some are more extreme than others, and it's hard. I think what we described as far as what a broker needs to do and run a robust process, it's sort of hard at that vantage point to know, could we have got more money for this business, right? But invariably, you may have been able to, and certainly can't feel really comfortable if the process wasn't great. But that's a big bust, okay? But again, hard to know concretely that it's like, that's what happened here, right? Because valuation is, it just is difficult to know. But what I can say with certainty is they should have done it differently, and it probably would have had a different outcome. Now, I'll give you like a very specific, it's a smaller issue, it's easy to solve for, but it's happened a number of times over the years where a seller comes to me and they've already signed the letter of intent that the broker gave them. Mm-hmm. And the letter of intent, let me give you an example. Like letters of intent are generally, as you know, non-binding, right? And so it's important that from the buyer's perspective, the seller be under exclusivity and there's confidentiality if it's not covered separately. But other than that, the deal can be traded, restructured.
Sure.
Shouldn't be, if everyone knows what they're doing.
And you can only go so far.
You can only go so far. But we've seen a number of deals where the buyers come in and they slip in wording that is binding.
Yeah.
That says things like, the seller must negotiate in good faith toward the closing. And they've already signed this letter of intent, and I don't want to make them feel bad, and I don't want to throw the broker under the bus, but that should not be in a letter of intent. It sounds innocuous. Sounds like, of course, aren't we going to do this in good faith? The problem, right, as you know, is what does that mean? How does a court enforce this? And the buyer can clearly walk away at any moment and just say, I don't want to do your deal. So now we've signed something where the seller doesn't have the same flexibility, right? The seller can renegotiate the deal. Sorry, the buyer can, but the seller can't. That's should not have happened. Right? And a good broker wouldn't have that in their standard form or wouldn't review an LOI for a client and allow that to be there. It just wouldn't happen. Biggest issue in the world? Not the biggest issue in the world. Right? Like a lot of what we do, hopefully it never comes up and becomes one because the deal never gets renegotiated. But it's an example of one where that shouldn't have happened. You don't need an M&A attorney to spot that. You need a broker who's doing their job, curious and understanding the rest of the process. It's not just finding a buyer and getting a fee.
Well, I love that because you're pointing out both a situation where the broker might not have known what they should have known and the seller's in a tough spot. A great broker may help the seller avoid signing a letter of intent with a buyer that had something like that in it, right? Yeah. Before you're at a negotiating standpoint. So the point I'm making is there are times where that's a role a great broker is there to help with.
Absolutely.
To get ahead and see some of these things that a first-time seller who doesn't, they're excited, they got interest in the deal, they don't know some of the landmines that are inevitably waiting for them, they haven't yet brought on M&A counsel, and they got an LOI, and they're ready to jump forward.
Yeah.
And a great broker says, whoa, time out. We got these guys to the table, but this is how the process has unfolded and will continue to unfold from here, right?
Yeah. And I think there are excellent brokers who will point that issue out and help negotiate that issue. And then there are excellent brokers who will say, hey, these aren't my waters, right? Now it's time to get an M&A attorney involved. I think either can work if they don't feel comfortable navigating those. Some people are just, I don't deal with law. I don't deal with, and that's fine. But it's also an issue that's not, you don't have to go to law school to understand this concept. And if a broker's seen it a number of times and they're comfortable to guide you through it, but one way or the other, they need to spot the issue and deal with the issue. And there's a lot of things like that all along the way. And none of us are perfect, right? None of us get everything right. None of us are, necessarily the perfect fit for every business. But generally speaking, your professional brokers are who earn their fees are good at what they do. So let's talk for a few minutes just about, we've said a lot about that. We don't want to leave people with maybe, well, that's great. How do I find that person? And before you say one thing, because let's go back to the original question, the title of the video, so it doesn't feel like, what do they call it? Basically bait and switch. Let's go back to the question. Do I need a broker? You don't need a broker. Should you hire a broker? And if so, who? The question is invariably yes. And I feel like when in what you're usually hearing when people are asking that question, sellers are asking that is, uncertainty about how to find that person. I think intuitively they believe that a great broker will be worth it. I believe they they will. Okay. But I think they're thinking, how do I pick that person? And I don't want to feel like I gave away 5, 6, 7% of my deal, whatever it ends up being, to someone who just listed this thing and did hardly anything. Even if it got done, it just feels they feel like they don't feel good about that transaction. So that's ultimately, I think, where this question is coming from in most cases. Certainly if the seller doesn't have a buyer yet, it's always the case, because finding your way to a buyer is a lot of the process.
That's right.
So yeah, where do we find a good broker?
Yeah.
A good M&A advisor. You call us.
Yeah. I think that's right. Well, there are a dime a dozen. I think about
brokers.
Yeah. Are a dime a dozen.
Yeah. Not great brokers.
Right. Yeah. And that's part of the challenge. I mean, we see with real estate, as the example I used earlier, where everybody's got a brother-in-law, a cousin, neighbor who can help them buy or sell a home, right? And so there are brokers out there. This is tricky, Brett. Honestly, how do you find a good broker? I mean, I think within our deals, when we have worked together and there have been brokers involved, it was always relational. And there's an element in my mind of spending enough time with somebody to see that they're gonna do the work, right? I think maybe I'm not getting to the essence of your question exactly and what we're talking about in this video, but I feel like in how do I find a broker? Well, you'll talk to several. They're out there, but there's a moment of divergence where a seller may realize this person is or isn't actually helping me understand the process.
Right.
Like something's off here. And maybe different than that or more than that. The work effort starts to feel a little bit wait a second, I was expecting you to kind of help me with my data room.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what a buyer is looking for in a data room. You tell me you need a data room. Okay, well, help me with that. A great broker says, let's do it. I'll get in there with you. Another seller, I just put together a data room, right?
Yep.
So there's a moment in how do I find the right broker where you're going to sense, I think a good broker is getting in the weeds with you, right?
Yeah.
Pulling together to do the hard work, and kind of jumping in the boat. So I don't know if you've had that experience, but because the negative ones are always, when I look back and I think that was not the best experience with that broker, it often comes from a lack of work effort on their part. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think we'd start with, to give it a little bit more sort of a couple concrete steps. One is there's different terminology out there. I touched on it earlier, right? There's business brokers, there's M&A advisors, there's investment bankers. They all fundamentally do the same thing. We call ourselves M&A brokers. Right. Why do we do that? Right? We do that so that clients, so we're trying to position ourselves as in between investment bankers, somewhere in this sort of the market as in between investment bankers and business brokers. Now, there's some excellent business brokers, okay? But down there in the main street, that's where they generally play. They handle businesses for $500,000, $1 million, maybe $2 million. If they fell into a 3 or 4, they'd be just absolutely super excited. They list those businesses. They don't run much of a process. That's sort of your average business broker. They're what they expect to put into a deal, what they put into a deal, their view of the whole process and perspective is fairly myopic.
Absolutely.
It just is. That's where they play. Your investment bankers, you go to Goldman Sachs or even in Austin, Westlake Focus Strategies or Westlake Securities are sort of two big regional investment banks. They're excellent. They understand these waters. They understand the process. They're really good. They're also not probably going to work your $2 to $5 million deal very hard.
That's right. The amount of work.
So if we're looking for a deal, and that's, call it $1 million to $10 million, we often say 2 to 20, but somewhere in what we call the lower middle market, you are looking for someone who is positioning themselves in between, right? And I feel like we are that. There's a group who's got a number of offices all over the country. I went to law school with one of their VPs called Benchmark. There's a number of Benchmark VC, but it's called Benchmark. They're excellent at what they do, and they play in these waters. They're another great choice. I often tell clients, talk to them. See who you feel comfortable with. But they they position themselves, and so you can get some of it off a website and what these people are doing. If they say investment banker, maybe they'll be excited about your $2 million deal, but probably not. And if they're a business broker, they probably don't have the perspective, know the waters, and expect to have to put in the effort you want for your $5 million deal. So there is some sort of positioning in the market there that is a starting point. And referrals, of course. And then, as you said, real early on in the process, as you ask questions and you get curious, you're the one who's going to pay. You're the one doing the hiring. Ask all your questions. You could start to understand, does this person understand these waters? And do they think like I do? Do we resonate? And then you get to cost, right? And it's not an insignificant part of the process, but it certainly shouldn't be the headline story. But then you get there, and ultimately you want something that's reasonable, that's market, things like that. But I think, again, it starts with finding your brokers that position themselves with your deal value.
I think that's right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, though, these sellers, many that we're talking to, it's their first time to sell a business.
Yeah.
And so it is, I think, a challenging exercise to understand those various levels of market that you just described. And the question again, should I hire a broker? When you're thinking about perhaps I hire a broker that isn't focused on the value of my deal, that's a challenge to think of the end result. Whereas you're not going to get necessarily a broker at that larger deal size, the investment bank type broker. And so to your point, there's this middle market area that we're focused on where we can bring a lot of that capability set from doing the diligence that's required and bringing the process to bear while still being able to work with the smaller deals that might fall below the investment bank level that you were describing.
Yeah. So bring it full circle. Do you need a broker? You don't absolutely need a broker. Should you hire a broker? Probably. Start with, can I find a broker that I'm comfortable with, that they're going to earn their money? Because if you find that right broker, the rest of any uncertainty you have, the other questions fall away. There's just no question that will be value. If you want to talk to us, you can find a way to do that in the description below. We appreciate you watching today.